The blood trail led through the pine forest like a ribbon of crimson ink spilled across virgin snow, and Dane Everett followed it with his heart hammering against his ribs, because whatever was bleeding out there in the wilderness was doing so in quantities that meant death was close. He had been checking his trap lines when he found the first spatters, then larger pools, then drag marks where something heavy had hauled itself forward despite catastrophic injury. The winter sun hung low and pale between the skeletal branches, offering little warmth as his breath ghosted white in the frigid air. His rifle hung ready in his hands, finger loose near the trigger guard, because anything that could bleed this much and still move was either dangerous or desperate, and both made for poor company in the untamed frontier lands where his cabin sat alone among the mountains. The trail veered toward a rocky outcropping, and that was where he found her. She was an orc woman, collapsed against the stone face like a puppet with severed strings, her green skin gone pale with blood loss and cold. Her leather armor hung in tatters, slashed through by what looked like bare claws from the parallel gouges across her torso and shoulder. One leg twisted at an angle that made Dane wince, clearly broken above the knee. Her breathing came shallow and rattling, lips tinged blue around her small tusks. Dark hair matted with ice hung across her face, and her eyes were closed. She was dying, here in the snow, alone and far from whatever orc clan might have claimed her. Dane stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, his mind racing through the implications. Orcs were enemies of humankind, or so every settlement and trading post proclaimed. They raided farms, stole livestock, burned homes. The territorial wars between orc clans and human homesteaders had painted these mountains red for generations. To help her would be to commit a kind of treason against his own kind. To leave her would be to let another living being die in agony when he had the means to prevent it. His father's voice echoed in memory, gruff and certain. A man's measure is not in what's easy, but in what's right when no one's watching. Dane set down his rifle and approached carefully, boots crunching in the snow. Up close, he could see she was young, perhaps 20 summers at most, with features that might have been striking before pain and injury had carved them into a mask of suffering. Her weapons were gone, likely lost in whatever fight had torn her apart. She wore no clan markings he recognized, no totems or fetishes that marked allegiance. He knelt beside her and pressed his fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. It fluttered weak and thready beneath her cold skin. When he touched her shoulder to assess the wounds, her eyes snapped open, pupils dilated with shock and pain. She made a sound between a gasp and a snarl, trying to pull away despite her broken body. "Easy," Dane said, keeping his voice low and calm the way he did with injured animals. "Easy now. I am not going to hurt you." She stared at him with eyes the color of amber, confusion and fear warring across her face. Her lips moved, but only a croak emerged. Her hand twitched toward where a weapon should have been at her belt, found nothing, and fell limp. "You are badly hurt," Dane continued, assessing the damage with a practiced eye born from years of frontier living and a stint as a field medic during the border skirmishes of his youth. "Bear, looks like. Got you good. That leg is broken and you are losing blood. If you stay here, you will be dead before sunset." She tried to speak again, managed only a wet cough that brought blood to her lips. Her eyes began to flutter closed. "No, stay with me," Dane said sharply, patting her cheek perhaps harder than necessary. Her eyes opened again, fixing on him with an intensity that spoke of an iron will fighting against a failing body. "I have a cabin about 12 miles south of here. I can get you there, get you warm, stop the bleeding. But I need you to hold on. Do you understand?" He was not sure she did. not sure she even spoke the common tongue well enough to parse his words. But something in his tone must have communicated intent, because she gave the barest nod. Then her eyes rolled back and consciousness left her. Dane worked quickly. He stripped off his heavy fur coat and wrapped it around her torso, binding the worst of the slashes to slow the bleeding. He fashioned a rough splint for her leg using branches and his belt, trying to immobilize it as best he could. She was tall for an orc woman, perhaps 5 feet and 9 inches, and heavily muscled despite her injuries. Dead weight, unconscious, she would be a brutal burden to carry. He had no choice. The sun was already sinking and night in these mountains killed as surely as any predator. Dane maneuvered her onto his back, getting his arms under her knees and hauling her up in a firefighter's carry. The weight hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. She had to weigh at least 170 pounds, all of it muscle and bone pressing down on his shoulders and spine. His knees nearly buckled. "All right," he muttered to himself, to her, to the indifferent forest around them. 12 miles. You have carried heavier. You have gone farther. Just 1 foot in front of the other. The first mile was merely difficult. Dane fell into a rhythm, focusing on his breathing, on the placement of his boots in the snow. The orc woman's blood soaked warm into his shirt where her wounds pressed against his back. Her breathing remained shallow but steady against his neck. He tried not to think about the weight, about the distance remaining, about what he was doing and why. The second mile brought pain, his shoulders screaming in protest, his lower back beginning to spasm. He had to stop twice to adjust his grip, to shift her weight, to give his trembling legs a moment's respite. The sun continued its inexorable descent. Temperature dropped with it. By the third mile, Dane's world had narrowed to pure endurance. Each step was a negotiation with his body, convincing muscles and tendons to function just a little longer, just a little farther. Sweat soaked his clothes despite the cold, freezing into ice crystals in his beard. His hands had gone numb where they gripped her legs. He focused on breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth, creating a meditative cadence that matched his footfalls. The orc woman stirred around mile 4, a low moan of pain escaping her. Dane felt her tense, felt the moment awareness returned and she realized her situation. "Stay still," he gasped out. "Do not struggle. I am trying to help you." She went rigid against him, every muscle taut. He could feel her fear, her confusion. Then, perhaps from blood loss or recognition that struggling would only hasten both their deaths, she went limp again. Not unconscious, he thought, but conserving strength. Mile 5 brought darkness. The moon rose full and bright, turning the snow-covered landscape into a study in silver and shadow. It was beautiful and merciless. Dane's legs had moved beyond pain into a distant numbness that worried him. He could not feel his feet anymore. Each step was an act of faith that the ground would be where his body expected it. He fell for the first time around mile 6, his boot catching on a hidden root beneath the snow. He managed to twist as he went down, taking the impact on his shoulder to protect the injured woman on his back. Pain exploded through his arm and side. For a long moment he lay there, face down in the snow, seriously considering simply staying there until the cold took them both. "Get up," he told himself, said it aloud. "Get up, Dane, get up." The orc woman made a sound, something that might have been a word in her language. He felt her hand grip weakly at his shirt. Dane got his hands under himself and pushed. It took 3 tries. When he finally regained his feet, the world spun sickeningly. He stood swaying, the woman's weight threatening to topple him again. He locked his knees, waited for equilibrium to return, and started walking. Mile 7. Mile 8. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step and the next and the next. His mind began to drift, half delirious from exertion and cold. He thought about his father, dead these 5 years, buried on the hillside behind the cabin. Thought about the war, about the orc warriors he had fought against, faceless enemies who probably had families and hopes just like his own. Thought about the woman on his back, about what her story might be, about what had brought her to that rocky outcropping to die alone. "What is your name?" He asked the darkness, not expecting an answer. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, slurred and distant silence. Then so quiet he almost missed it. "Cora." The surprise of it jolted him, gave him a surge of energy. "Cora," he repeated. "I am Dane Everett. My cabin is not far now. Just hold on a little longer." He had no idea if that was true. Could have been 3 miles or 10. Everything looked the same in the moonlight. Mile 9 brought hallucinations, shadows at the edge of his vision that might have been wolves or bears or demons born from exhaustion. He ignored them, plodding forward with the dumb persistence of an ox in harness. His breathing had gone ragged, each inhalation a knife in his side. Broken rib, maybe, from the fall, did not matter, could not matter. "Why?" The word came from Cora, barely a whisper. "Why help me?" Dane did not have an answer that made sense, even to himself. "Could not leave you," he managed. "Would not." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "You are strange, human," he might have laughed if he had the breath for it. Mile 10 was when he started talking to keep himself conscious, rambling about anything and everything. About his father's farm, about learning to trap and hunt, about the year he spent as a soldier before he realized he was fighting for the greed of lords who cared nothing for the people who died in their names. About building his cabin with his own hands, about the isolation and the peace of the mountain solitude. Cora listened, or at least did not tell him to stop. Sometimes she would ask a question in her accented but understandable common tongue, and he would answer between gasping breaths. Mile 11, and he recognized a lightning-split pine that marked the final approach to his homestead. Relief flooded through him, and with it the terrible temptation to simply collapse now that safety was near. He forced himself onward. So close, so close. He nearly missed the cabin in the dark, his vision swimming. Only the familiar shape of the stone chimney against the stars oriented him. He staggered the final 100 yards like a drunkard, bounced off his own front door and fumbled with the latch. The door swung open. Warmth rushed out, blessed warmth from the banked fire in his hearth. Dane made it 3 steps inside before his legs finally gave out. He managed to twist again, landing hard on his side, and Cora rolled off his back with a pained cry. For several minutes neither of them moved, both simply breathing in the relative warmth of the cabin. Dane's entire body felt like one massive bruise, muscles twitching and spasming. But they were here. They had made it. He forced himself to move. Cora needed care immediately. His own suffering could wait. Dane dragged himself to his knees, then his feet, and stumbled to the hearth. He built up the fire with shaking hands until it roared, filling the small cabin with light and heat. Then he turned his attention to Cora. She had managed to prop herself against his bed frame, her face a mask of pain and exhaustion. In the firelight, her injuries looked even worse than he had thought. The bare claws had gouged deep into her shoulder and chest, and her broken leg had swollen grotesquely despite his makeshift splint. "All right," Dane said, forcing his mind to focus, to remember his field medic training. "I need to clean these wounds and set that leg properly. It is going to hurt. A lot." Cora nodded, her jaw set. "Do what you must." He gathered supplies. Clean water boiled over the fire, strips of cloth torn from spare shirts, a precious bottle of grain alcohol saved for emergencies, needle and thread. His hands steadied as he worked, the familiar ritual of tending wounds overriding his exhaustion. The cleaning was brutal. Dane poured alcohol into the bare claw wounds and Cora screamed, a sound that echoed in the small cabin and sent ice down his spine. She cursed in her own language, words that needed no translation. But she did not fight him, did not pull away. "I know," he said quietly, stitching the worst of the gashes closed. "I know it hurts. You are doing well. You are very brave." Her hand shot out and gripped his wrist with shocking strength. Their eyes met. "You carried me 12 miles, she said, and there was something in her voice he could not quite identify. Wonder, maybe. Disbelief. "Yes," Dane agreed simply. "Why?" she asked again. "Because it was the right thing to do." She stared at him for a long moment, then released his wrist. "Finish," she said. The leg was the worst part. Dane had to pull it straight to set it properly, and even braced for it. Cora's scream of agony made him flinch. But the bone settled into place with a grinding click that he felt as much as heard. He splinted it properly this time, using the straight planks he kept for repairs, binding it tightly with strips of cloth. By the time he finished, they were both trembling. Cora's face had gone gray-green with pain and shock. Dane helped her onto his bed, the only real furniture in the cabin besides the table and chairs. He piled furs and blankets over her, stoking the fire higher. "Water," she whispered. He brought her a cup and helped her drink, supporting her head. Some of it spilled around her tusks, but she got enough down. When she lay back, her eyes were already closing. "Sleep," Dane said. "You need to heal." "Where will you sleep?" she asked, words slurring. He looked at the hard wooden floor, at the pile of furs in the corner that sometimes served as a spare pallet. "I will manage." Her hand found his again, her grip weak but deliberate. "You carried me 12 miles, she repeated, as if she still could not quite believe it. Her eyes opened one more time, fixing on his face. "You are my husband now." Then she was asleep or unconscious, breathing deeply and evenly. Dane sat frozen, her hand still in his, trying to process what she had just said. "Husband." He carefully extricated his hand and stood, moving to the fire. His whole body ached, a deep bone weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He should sleep, he knew, but his mind raced with questions and implications. What had Cora meant? Was it some orc custom he did not know about? Or simply the rambling of a woman barely conscious with pain and blood loss? Dane shook his head. It did not matter tonight. Tonight, all that mattered was that they were both alive, both safe. Everything else could wait until morning. He made himself eat a little, forcing down cold bread and dried meat, and drank deeply from his water barrel. Then he arranged the spare furs near the fire, banked the flames to last through the night, and lay down. Sleep took him almost immediately, pulling him under like a dark tide. He woke to pale dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window and the sound of labored breathing that was not his own. Dane pushed himself upright, every muscle in his body screaming protest. He felt like he had been beaten with clubs. Cora still slept in his bed, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He checked her temperature with the back of his hand against her forehead and found her burning with fever. Not unexpected with wounds like hers, but dangerous nonetheless. Dane spent the morning tending to her, changing bandages, coaxing water and thin broth past her lips whenever she drifted toward consciousness. She rambled in her fever, speaking in the orcish tongue he did not understand, sometimes crying out, sometimes laughing. He bathed her face with cool water and kept the fire going and worried. The fever broke on the second day. Dane was changing the bandages on her shoulder when her eyes opened, clear and aware for the first time since he had brought her to the cabin. "You," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Me," he agreed. "How are you feeling?" Like I was mauled by a bear and carried 12 miles on someone's back, she said. A pause. Thank you for saving my life, Dane shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Cora said flatly. They would not have. Especially not a human for an orc. She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, and fell back. How long have I been here? 2 days. You have had a fever, but it seems to have broken. You were lucky. The wounds were clean, no festering. She touched the bandages on her shoulder carefully, testing their limits. You are skilled at healing. I learned during the war, field medic for a company of border guards. He did not elaborate, and she did not ask. They were quiet for a moment, and then Cora said, I called you my husband. So she remembered. Dane felt heat rise to his face. You did. I was fevered in pain, but I remember saying it. She met his eyes directly. Do you know the tradition? No, he admitted. Cora shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position. Among my people, among the Green Peak clan, if a warrior saves another's life at great personal cost, carries them when they cannot walk, tends their wounds, gives them shelter, the rescued owes a life debt. It is ancient tradition, older than memory. The debt can only be repaid through service, through loyalty. She paused. Or through marriage. Dane sat back, processing this. So when you called me your husband, you were declaring intent to pay this debt. I was declaring that you had earned the right to claim me as your wife if you wanted it. The choice is yours. She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. I would understand if you do not. A human taking an orc wife would be madness in the eyes of your people. I have never cared much what people think, Dane said slowly. But marriage is a serious thing. We barely know each other. True, Cora acknowledged. I offer it because it is tradition, because it is what honor demands, but there are other ways to repay a life debt. I could stay and work for you, hunt for you, help with your homestead. I could offer you my skills as a warrior for protection. The debt must be paid, but how is your choice? Dane stood and moved to the fire, stirring the pot of stew he had cooking. His mind churned with possibilities and complications. A part of him, the part that had been lonely for longer than he cared to admit, was tempted by the idea of a wife, even one as unusual as an orc woman. Another part reminded him of the practical difficulties, the social ostracism, the danger they would both face from those who hated the idea of humans and orcs mixing. Let us start with you healing, he said finally. You cannot repay any debts dead or crippled. We can discuss the rest when you are stronger. If Cora was disappointed or relieved, she did not show it. She simply nodded. That is fair. The days fell into a rhythm. Dane would wake at dawn, build up the fire, prepare breakfast. He would check Cora's wounds, change bandages, help her eat and drink. Then he would go about his work, checking trap lines, hunting, cutting firewood, all the 1,000 tasks required to survive alone in the mountains. He would return in the evening, prepare dinner, and they would talk. It was the talking that surprised him most. Cora was intelligent and curious, asking questions about human customs, about his life, about the world beyond the mountains. She told him about the Green Peak clan, about growing up learning to hunt and fight, about the complex politics between orc clans and their long conflict with human settlements. We are not so different, she said one evening, propped up in bed with furs wrapped around her shoulders. Humans and orcs, we both want safety, food, families, but we have been fighting so long that we have forgotten why it started. The elders say orcs raided first, Dane said, not argumentatively, just stating what he had been taught. Our elders say humans encroached on sacred hunting grounds, Cora countered. Killed the great herds that sustained us. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps neither. It does not matter to the dead. He thought about that. about the soldiers he had fought beside and the orc warriors he had fought against, and found he could not argue with her logic. A week after he had carried her home, Cora managed to stand for the first time. Dane helped her up, supporting her weight as she balanced precariously on her good leg. The broken one was still splinted and could not bear weight yet, but she stood tall, towering over him by several inches. "I am not a small woman," she said with a hint of humor, "and you carried me 12 miles. You must be stronger than you look." "Stubbornness goes a long way," Dane replied. She laughed, a sound that transformed her face, and Dane felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, he realized. Not in the delicate way of human women, but in the way of mountains and storms, all strength and wild grace. Cora must have seen something in his expression because her own softened. "You look at me strangely sometimes," she said quietly. "Just seeing you," he said, meeting her eyes. "Really seeing you, not just the wounds and the fever." Her hand came up to touch his face, her palm rough with calluses. "I see you too, Dane Everett, my strange kind human who saves enemies and asks nothing in return." "Not nothing," he heard himself say. "I would like very much for you to stay. Not because of debts or tradition, but because I want you to." "As what?" Cora asked. "Friend, worker, wife?" Dane took a breath, knowing he was about to change his life irrevocably. "Start as friends," he said. "See where it goes from there. If it becomes more, well, I would not object." Cora smiled, small tusks gleaming. "I would not object either." Winter deepened around them, and Cora healed. By the 3rd week, she could move around the cabin with a crutch Dane fashioned from a sturdy branch. By the 5th week, she was putting weight on her injured leg, limping but mobile. Her shoulder wounds closed and scarred, leaving raised lines across her green skin that she traced sometimes with an absent expression. "Battle scars," she said when she caught Dane looking. "Among my people, they are marks of honor, proof of survival." "They are proof you are tough," he agreed. She started helping with tasks around the cabin, insisting despite his protests that she needed to be useful. She could not hunt yet, but she could prepare hides, mend clothes, cook meals. She was better at cooking than he was, using herbs and spices in combinations he would never have thought of. The cabin began to smell of things more interesting than boiled meat and burnt porridge. They settled into domesticity with surprising ease, learning each other's habits and preferences. Dane discovered that Cora sang while she worked, low, wordless melodies in minor keys. Cora learned that Dane talked to himself when he was working through a problem, muttering under his breath. They argued sometimes, about silly things like the proper way to stack firewood or whether venison or rabbit made better stew. And Dane found he enjoyed even the arguments, the spark and energy of having someone to engage with. One evening in late winter, nearly 2 months after he had found her dying in the snow, they sat together by the fire after dinner. Cora was sewing a tear in one of his shirts, and Dane was working on fletching arrows. The wind howled outside, but inside it was warm and comfortable. "I have been thinking about my clan," Cora said suddenly. "They must think me dead by now." Dane's hands stilled. He had known this conversation would come eventually. "Do you want to go back to them?" "I do not know," she admitted. "When I left, I was young and stupid. I got into an argument with the chief's son, said things I should not have said. In anger, I swore I would leave and make my own way. I thought I would join one of the border raider bands, make a name for myself. Instead, I got mauled by a bear and rescued by a human." She set down the sewing. "If I went back now, it would be as an outcast who crawled home defeated. And if they knew I had been living with a human, that I had called him husband, I would be cast out anyway." "So do not go back," Dane said. "Stay here. Is that what you want?" He set down his arrow and turned to face her fully. "Yes, I have been alone in these mountains for 5 years, Cora. 5 years of silence and solitude. I thought I wanted that, thought I needed it after the war. But having you here, it has reminded me what I was missing. Companionship. Partnership. Someone to share the burden and the beauty of this life. Cora's amber eyes reflected the firelight. I have felt the same. Orcs are not solitary creatures by nature. We live in clans and families. Being alone was one of my stupider ideas. She paused. But I have been happy here. With you. Then stay, Dane said. Not as a life debt, not as obligation, but because you want to. And what would I be to you? She asked. Still just friends. Dane stood and crossed to her, kneeling so their faces were level. I have been trying to be patient, he said. Trying not to push because you were injured and I did not want you to feel obligated. But the truth is, I have fallen in love with you, Cora of the Green Peak clan. Somewhere between carrying you home and learning how you take your tea and hearing you sing while you work, I fell completely and entirely in love with you. Cora's breath caught. Dane, you do not have to say anything, he continued. I just wanted you to know. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, you should know that. She reached out and pulled him closer, her hand on the back of his neck. You foolish, wonderful man, she said softly. I love you too, have for weeks now. I was just afraid you saw me only as an obligation, a wounded creature you felt responsible for. Never, Dane said fiercely. You are so much more than that. They kissed then, tentative at first, learning the shape of each other's mouths, the feel of lips and tusks and breath mingling. It deepened slowly, weeks of tension and unspoken feelings pouring out in the touch of hands and press of bodies. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cora smiled. So, husband, she said, the word playful now, chosen freely. When do we make it official? Is now too soon? Dane asked, only half joking. She laughed. Perhaps we should wait until spring, when I can stand without wincing and you can invite witnesses who will not freeze to death getting here. I do not need witnesses, he said. Just you and me and a promise. Cora cupped his face in her hands. Then you have it. I promise to stay by your side, to share your life, to be your partner in all things, for however long we both shall live. I promise the same, Dane said. To honor you, to care for you, to walk beside you through whatever comes. You are my wife, Cora, in every way that matters. And you are my husband, she agreed. The man who carried me 12 miles on his back and changed both our lives forever. They sealed the promise with another kiss. And then Cora pulled him to the bed, and they spent the night learning each other in new and intimate ways, mapping scars and muscles and the terrain of shared pleasure. Spring came slowly to the mountains, snowmelt revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of new growth. Cora's leg healed fully, though it ached sometimes when rain was coming. She began hunting again, bringing home deer and elk and once, memorably, a mountain lion that had been stalking their trap lines. Show off, Dane had said when she dragged the big cat home. You saved my life, she replied with a grin. I am simply proving I am worth the trouble. They built an addition to the cabin that spring, a second room that could serve as storage or, someday, a nursery. Neither of them spoke about children yet, but the possibility hung in the air like a promise. Life settled into contentment. They worked together, hunted together, made love under the stars on warm nights when the world felt vast and full of possibility. Dane taught Cora to read common tongue, and she taught him Orcish, and they laughed at each other's terrible pronunciation. But peace in the frontier was always temporary. The trouble came on a bright morning in early summer. Dane was checking trap lines in the high meadows when he heard voices, human voices, coming from the direction of the cabin. He ran, heart in his throat, arriving to find 4 men on horseback circling Cora where she stood in front of their home. "Well, well," one of them was saying as Dane approached. "An orc this far into human territory. Where is your raiding party, Greenskin?" "I am alone," Cora said, her voice level despite the clear threat. "I live here peacefully." "Orcs do not live peacefully," another rider spat. "They raid and kill and steal, probably planning an attack on the settlements." "I am planning nothing except dinner," Cora said. Dane could see her hands were empty, held out in a gesture of peace, but her posture was tense, ready to fight or flee. "We should kill it now," a third rider said, and Dane saw he had a rifle aimed at Cora's chest. "Save ourselves trouble later." "No," Dane said, stepping into the clearing. 4 rifles swung toward him. "There will be no killing here." The riders took in his appearance, the rifle in his hands, the dangerous calm in his eyes. The first speaker, a hard-faced man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, narrowed his eyes. "This your land, friend?" he asked. "It is." "And she is my wife. Lower your weapons." Shock rippled through the riders. The sheriff's horse danced sideways, responding to his rider's tension. "Your wife? Have you lost your mind, marrying an orc?" "I saved her life," Dane said. "We fell in love, we are married. That is all you need to know." "The law does not recognize marriage between humans and orcs," the sheriff said. "It is an abomination." "I do not care what the law recognizes," Dane replied. His rifle was still lowered, but his finger rested near the trigger. "She is my wife. She lives here peacefully. We bother no one." "You have no cause to threaten her. She is an orc on human land," one of the other riders said. "That is cause enough." "This is my land," Dane said, his voice going cold and hard in a way it had not since his soldier days. "Private land, legally claimed and registered. I decide who lives here. And I am telling you to leave. Now." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. 4 armed men against 1, but Dane had the advantage of position and the dangerous competence of a veteran. And killing a human over an orc, even an orc wife, would raise questions the sheriff probably did not want to answer. "You are making a mistake," the sheriff said finally, wheeling his horse around. "When she turns on you, when her clan comes raiding, do not come crying to us for help." "I would not dream of it," Dane said. The riders left, but the threat hung in the air long after the sound of hoofbeats faded. Cora stood rigid where she had been, her face carefully blank. Dane went to her and pulled her into his arms. She held herself stiff for a moment, then melted against him, shaking. "They would have killed me," she said into his shoulder, "if you had not been here." "But I was here," he said, "and I will always be here." "They will come back," Cora said, "or others like them, you know they will." He did know. The encounter had been a reminder that the world beyond their mountain refuge did not share their vision of peace between their peoples. As long as they stayed here, they would be targets, threats to the rigid boundaries that kept humans and orcs at war. "Then we deal with it when it happens," Dane said, "together." But Cora pulled back, her expression troubled. "You would fight your own people for me." "You are my people now," he said simply. "You are my wife. Where you go, I go. What threatens you threatens me. That is what the promise meant." Tears gathered in her amber eyes. "I do not want you to have to choose." "I already chose," Dane said. "The day I picked you up and carried you home, every day since then, I choose you, Cora, always." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he held her and let her feel his certainty, his commitment. That night they talked long into the dark, weighing options and futures. They could stay and fight for their right to exist as they were, but that path led to violence and possibly death. They could separate, Cora returning to her clan or disappearing into the wilderness, but neither of them could stomach that idea. Or they could leave, go somewhere so remote that the laws and prejudices of both their peoples could not reach them. "I have heard stories," Cora said as they lay together in bed, her head on Dane's chest, "of a valley 3 weeks' journey north of here, beyond the glacier pass. A place where the land is fertile and no clans claim it, too far from human settlements to draw attention. Some of the outcasts speak of it, a legend mostly, but what if it is real? 3 weeks through the high mountains," Dane said. "With winter coming in a few months, we would need to go soon to have time to build shelter before the snows." "Is it worth the risk?" Cora asked. "To chase a legend?" Dane thought about the sheriff's hard eyes, about the certainty that more trouble would come, about the life they could build somewhere no one cared about the color of their skin or the shape of their tusks. "Yes," he said, "it is worth the risk. For a chance at real peace, at a future where we do not have to hide or fight or justify our existence, it is worth any risk." They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Dane cached supplies along the route he thought they would take, hiding food and tools in locations he could find again. Cora hunted and preserved meat, drying it into jerky that would last the journey. They packed what they could carry, abandoning the rest. On the morning they left, Dane stood in the cabin doorway and looked at the home he had built, the life he was leaving behind. It hurt, but not as much as he thought it would. Home, he was learning, was not a place but a person, and his home was packing the last of their supplies onto the travois they would pull. "Ready?" Cora asked, coming to stand beside him. "Ready," he confirmed. They closed the door and began walking north. The journey was brutal. They climbed through pine forests and across boulder fields, following game trails and Dane's memory of maps he had studied years ago. They crossed streams swollen with snowmelt and skirted the edges of cliffs that dropped away into misty depths. At night, they huddled together under a shared blanket, taking turns keeping watch. On the 8th day, they encountered an orc hunting party. There were 6 of them, warriors from the Broken Axe clan, judging by their armor markings. They saw Cora first, called out to her in Orcish. She responded, and a rapid conversation ensued that Dane could only partially follow. The lead warrior, a scarred veteran with one eye, looked at Dane with naked hostility. He said something that made Cora stiffen. "What did he say?" Dane asked quietly. "He asked why I travel with a human, if I am a prisoner or a traitor." She lifted her chin. "I told him you are my husband." The hunting party erupted in angry voices. The one-eyed leader drew his weapon, a heavy axe that had clearly seen much use. He stepped toward Dane with clear intent. Cora moved between them, her own hands going to the knives at her belt. She spoke rapidly in Orcish, her voice ringing with authority. Dane caught a few words: honor, life debt, tradition. The one-eyed warrior responded with something that sounded like a challenge. Cora replied with what was definitely a refusal. The standoff stretched, tension thick enough to taste. Finally, one of the other warriors, a younger orc with intelligent eyes, spoke up. He gestured to Cora's scarred shoulder, said something about bears and survival. The one-eyed warrior lowered his axe fractionally, more conversation, calmer now. Then Cora turned to Dane. "They will let us pass," she said, "but only because the tradition of life debt is sacred even to the Broken Axe clan. They think I am mad and you are taking advantage of me, but they will not interfere." "Small mercies," Dane muttered. The hunting party moved aside, though their stares followed the couple as they passed. Dane kept his hand near his rifle, not relaxing until the orcs were well out of sight. "That was closer than I would have liked," he said. "Agreed," Cora said. "Let us hope we encounter no more of my people." Or yours. Luck, or fate, or simple chance held. They saw no one else as they climbed higher into the mountains, entering regions where the air grew thin and hard to breathe. The glacier pass appeared on the 15th day, a river of ancient ice flowing between two peaks like a frozen highway. Crossing it took 2 full days of careful navigation around crevices and unstable ice bridges. Dane's heart lived in his throat the entire time, certain that at any moment the ice would give way and swallow them both. But Cora proved surprisingly knowledgeable about ice travel, testing each step and finding the safest routes. On the far side of the glacier, the land changed. The mountains gave way to rolling foothills covered in tall grass and wildflowers. A river ran through the valley bottom, clear and fast and full of fish. Game trails crisscrossed the meadows, and in the distance Dane could see forests of aspen and pine. This must be it, Cora breathed, staring at the valley spread before them. The legend made real. They descended into the valley and spent days exploring, finding the best location for a homestead. They settled on a rise above the river with good drainage and a view of the approaches, a habit born from both their pasts that neither questioned. Building began immediately. They worked from dawn to dusk, felling trees and hauling stones, constructing a cabin larger than the one they had left behind. Cora proved to be skilled at stonework, and soon they had a hearth and chimney that drew clean and hot. Dane handled the carpentry, fitting logs together with the precision learned from building his first cabin. By the time the first snows fell, they had walls, a roof, a door, and shutters for the windows. It was crude but solid and warm enough with the fire burning. They had stores of food and water, furs for blankets and winter clothes. They would survive. That first winter in the valley was hard but hopeful. They lived in close quarters, learning each other's moods and needs with an intimacy that went beyond the physical. They talked through long evenings, making plans for spring, for the garden Cora wanted to plant, and the improvements Dane wanted to make to the cabin. On the longest night of winter, when darkness seemed absolute and the cold bit with teeth of iron, they lay together before the fire and Cora told Dane she was pregnant. He stared at her, the words taking a moment to penetrate. Then joy flooded through him, so intense it was almost frightening. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "I have missed my courses twice now, and this morning I could not keep breakfast down. I have seen it enough in the clan women to know." "A baby," Dane said, wonder filling his voice. "Our baby." "Half human, half orc," Cora said. "I do not know what that will mean, if they will be accepted by either of our peoples." "They will be ours," Dane said fiercely. "That is all that matters. We will raise them here in this valley, free from the hatreds and prejudices of the world. We will teach them to be strong and kind and to judge people by their actions, not their blood." Cora pulled him close. "You are going to be a good father." "You are going to be a good mother," he replied. Then, quieter, "Thank you for staying, for building this life with me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed I could have." "You carried me 12 miles on your back," Cora said, echoing the words she had spoken that first fevered night so many months ago. "You gave me a second chance at life. This is the least I can do." "It is everything," Dane said. Spring arrived slowly, ice melting into rivulets that fed the river, grass pushing through brown earth. Cora's belly swelled, and with it came new challenges and new joys. Dane hovered, protective and anxious, until Cora laughed and told him she was an orc warrior, not a fragile flower. Still, he worried. There was no midwife here, no healer to consult if something went wrong. He read and reread the single medical text he had brought from his old cabin, memorizing the section on childbirth until he could recite it in his sleep. The baby came on a warm day in early summer, when the valley was lush and green and full of life. Cora's labor was long and brutal, and Dane felt helpless watching her pain, able to do nothing but hold her hand and offer water and encouragement. But when the baby finally emerged, squalling and perfect, all the fear and worry evaporated. Dane took the tiny body, still slick with birth, and stared in wonder. The baby had green-tinted skin lighter than Cora's, Dane's brown eyes, and the tiniest nub tusks already visible. A boy, healthy and strong. "He is perfect," Dane said, placing the baby in Cora's arms. She looked down at their son, tears streaming down her face. "He is ours," she said, "beautiful and ours." They named him Devon, a human name for a child of two worlds. He grew quickly, laughing easily and crying rarely. His skin darkened a bit as the months passed, settling into a shade between his parents. His tusks grew in small but definite. He had Cora's amber eyes after all, Dane realized as Devon's infant blue changed around 6 months. Raising a child in the wilderness was challenging in ways Dane had not anticipated. There was constant vigilance required, keeping Devon safe from the dangers of their isolated life. But there were joys too, watching his son take his first steps in the meadow behind their cabin, hearing his first words, seeing him discover the world with fresh wonder. 2 years passed in the valley, seasons cycling through their eternal dance. The cabin expanded again, rooms added as needed. The garden flourished under Cora's care, producing vegetables that supplemented their hunting. They kept chickens and goats, milk and eggs adding variety to their diet. Life was good. Hard but good. Purposeful and meaningful in ways Dane had never experienced in his solitary existence or his time at war. On a warm afternoon in their 3rd summer in the valley, Dane was teaching Devon to fish in the shallows of the river when he saw Cora running toward them from the cabin. His first thought was danger, and he scooped up Devon and reached for his rifle, but Cora was smiling, waving. "Dane, come quickly. There are people." The words sent ice through his veins. They had seen no one in 3 years, had begun to think themselves truly alone. He held Devon close and jogged back to the cabin with Cora. 3 figures stood at the edge of their clearing. As they got closer, Dane saw they were outcasts like themselves. A human woman, an orc man, and a child who was clearly a blend of both. The human woman stepped forward, hands out in peace. "We heard stories," she said, her voice tentative and hopeful, "of a valley where mixed couples could live safely. We have been searching for months. Is this it?" Dane looked at Cora. Cora looked at Devon. Devon, oblivious to the weight of the moment, laughed and reached for a butterfly dancing past. "Yes," Cora said. "This is it. You are welcome here." And so their solitary life became a community. More came that summer and the next, drawn by rumors and desperate hope. Families fleeing persecution. Couples who refused to let prejudice dictate their hearts. Children of 2 worlds looking for a place to belong. They built a village in the valley. Cabins and barns and a common hall where they gathered for celebrations and decisions. They established rules and systems, ways of living together that honored both human and orc traditions. They planted crops and raised animals and built a life together. Dane became a leader almost by accident, the one people looked to for guidance simply because he had been there first, because his quiet competence inspired confidence. Cora, too, found her place, training the younger generation in hunting and tracking, teaching them to survive and thrive in the wilderness. Devon grew up surrounded by other children like himself, never having to feel alone or strange. He learned both languages, both cultures, and absorbed the best of each. He was happy, and watching his son's untroubled childhood healed something in Dane he had not known was broken. Years passed. Devon grew into a strong, capable young man. The valley community flourished, numbering over 100 souls. They traded with the occasional wandering merchant, careful to maintain their secrecy, but not so isolated as to stagnate. On their 10th anniversary in the valley, Cora and Dane stood together on the hillside above the river, watching the sun set over the village they had helped build. Devon was down there somewhere, probably courting the blacksmith's daughter despite being only 16. Life continued its relentless forward march. "You ever regret it?" Cora asked, her hand in his. "Leaving your old life behind, becoming an outcast for me." Dane thought about it seriously because Cora deserved that. He thought about the cabin he had abandoned, the solitary life he had led, the path not taken. "Not even for a moment," he said finally. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life, this community, our son, all of it exists because you were stubborn enough to survive a bear attack, and I was stubborn enough to carry you home." 12 miles, Cora said, smiling. 12 miles that changed everything, Dane agreed. He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her. Worth every step. They stood together as the stars came out, as they had for 10 years and would for decades more. Two people from different worlds who had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from the ruins of prejudice and hate. Below them, the village lights flickered to life one by one, beacons of hope and home. Children laughed, music drifted up from the common hall, smoke rose from hearth fires cooking dinners. Life, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful glory. Cora leaned her head on Dane's shoulder. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied, as he had 1,000 times before and would 1,000 times again. And in the valley where two worlds met and merged, where love had conquered hate and hope had built a future, they stood together and watched the night embrace the day, partners and lovers and friends, now and always.